Right, okay. Well, first of all, Tom asked me to talk about the Landscape Institute and lobbying. Next slide, please.
Okay.
Yep. So that's that. Next slide. Basically, the Landscape Institute is a charity, and the Charity Commission issues campaigning and political activity guidance. Next slide.
I feel like the monkey.
And again, which is this document. And that's quite clear. Campaigning and political activity can be legitimate and valuable activities for charities to undertake. Charities campaign for a change in the law. It is it's incorrect to say that charities can't lobby. Yep, it's incorrect to say that the Landscape Institute can't lobby. It is incorrect, it is wrong. Yep, it is a fiction. Enough of that. Right? So, Highrise London. This is partly dealing with London, and it's partly dealing with the worldview, and it's partly dealing with a concern about climate change. Next slide. So that's a popular view of London. That's taken from the top of St Thomas's Hospital, and the reason for that view, looking as it does, is because it's of Westminster, and 70% of Westminster is a conservation area. Yep, that's why there's no high rise in that view, except outside the conservation areas, and the GPO tower, of course, is in Camden. Next slide. Same ward, same hospital, different view up the river. That is a view up the river. Basically, we have a policy where all the 32 London boroughs have their own disconnected high-rise policies. Next slide. And those are the buildings in the pipeline. I agree with Tom that we should have that city skyline should be planned, and I agree with Tom that it's not being planned. Unfortunately, I feel it's too late probably for London. But I'm happy that Tom is shaking his head from side to side and can show where I'm wrong. But there's 510 buildings in over a year ago which have got planning permission. 115 are under construction. So next slide. Yep. So how big is high rise? There's various definitions. Tall building greater than 16 stories, got a skyscraper, and you've got high-rise buildings from fire safety. Sorry, something's gone wrong with the PowerPoint. For fire safety as being buildings over 18 metres in height. In Scotland, the regulations are slightly different. No, don't worry. It's next slide. It's all readable. So, to talk about density of population and the land. Next. A question for everybody. How much of the land surface of the Earth, excluding the Antarctic, has been developed?
Are you talking about urban areas specifically?
Yes.
You're talking about less than 3% of ice-free land?
It's around 3% is the figure. If we go to the next slide, the figure I've got is that which is based on University of Columbia data.
Okay.
Yep. So
next.
Yep. In terms of population growth, this is United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs forecasting about population growth up to the end of the century. You can see the total population rising and then levelling off at around 10 to 12 billion. And you can see that the other point, which is particularly significant, is that the growth rate is going down. Yeah? No, you're looking quizzical. The size of families is going down. Yeah, is the point, which I suggest is hopeful. How many people? My father was one of 9 children. How many people have got 9 children in their family here? How many people have got? Well, we won't go through the whole lot. But how many people have got 5 children in their family?
But that's not the. Yeah, but I think you're asking a kind of.
No, I'm not asking.
A white audience. If you ask.
Yeah, that is the point. Yep, I'm asking a white audience. I'm a single child, by the way. The point.
Before was global.
These are global figures, and the global forecast is for it to go down. which is what's been happening in Asia.
The forecast was about 50% of the population already is organised, and about 60% is going to go towards 60%.
These are UN figures. It's going down. Yeah, annual rate of population growth is descending. It's going down to 0.
No, I was talking about
according
the rate,
to
not the rate of population. I was talking about the percentage of population which is urbanised.
Yes, I've not mentioned that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not different point. I'm talking about global population. Yeah, and I suggest that's hopeful. In Africa, the family size will go down. It will follow the pattern of Asia in the 20th century, or of Europe in the early 20th century, is the argument.
And the point being?
The point being that our population won't be more than 12 billion. Yep.
Oh well, and the land degradation that goes with.
Let me get on with my lecture. Right. This is quoting Ken Yang. A skyscraper is not an ecological building. He's one of my heroes. It's one of the most unecological of all building types, and it's because they require excessive materials and sophisticated structural systems, and they demand a greater energy. Next slide.
I'm not sure I want to go into this.
Yeah. Now, there's various ways that we can measure sustainable construction. I'm focusing on embodied carbon and embodied energy. Next slide. Building material and construction activities altogether, including occupation, account for about 36% of global final energy use. Yep. And 39% of energy-related carbon dioxide emissions in 2017. Yep. The point about this is that the construction part is this, and this is the operational side of buildings. Working the lights, working the lift.
Just got to get smarter, Robert. I say we just got to get smarter.
We've got to get a lot smarter, and let me show you how we can get smarter. So we need to consider embodied carbon and energy all the way through. How many people have laid, say, stone paving sets or whatever on concrete? Or on a cement bed? Why?
Good question.
Why? People don't in Holland, people don't in Germany. You can lay it on a sun bed.
Well, it's out of my remit, so...
Bonkers. Yeah. Next slide. Just to try and bring it home.
One for you.
So, in terms of embodied carbon, what we need to do is use materials which are low in embodied carbon. Not to use steel, not to use aluminium, etc. Yeah. So, straw, stone, brick, concrete, timber. Yep. Next slide, please. Yep. We can follow the guidance, zero carbon building. This is the recognised British guidance, zero carbon buildings. Yep. Next slide, if you wish. Now, building height, the higher the building, the more embodied energy you use. This is the graph. Steel frames, the worst of all, reinforced concrete frames, medium bad reinforced concrete frames and lightweight floor structures are about as good as you can get. Next slide, please. Yeah. So we need low embodied carbon construction. What is low embodied carbon construction? Next slide. Bricks. Next slide. Timber. This is quite a nice scheme just outside of Paris, Nanterre, with cross-laminated timber, and it's six-storey construction. Next slide. That's the tallest timber building I can find in London, which is 10 stories. Yep.
I think they have some in Russia which are probably 20, 25 stories.
Yes. Yeah.
Next.
Yep. And of course, Earth. Why do I show Earth? Because it's, on a global scale, about 30% of the world's population live in earth buildings. Sun-baked brick. This is not fired brick. Pise, adobe, Devon cob. Yeah. And just so this is in
Yemen?
Shibam in Yemen, which is up to 10 stories high, showing what you can do with mud structures in a dry climate. Next slide. And that's showing what you can do with earth structures in a wet climate. It's just north of Ahancliffe at the Centre for Alternative Technology, the yellow structure. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
And of course there's stone buildings, and what better place to make this point than here. Yeah. That is Grey Street and John Dobson's building. City density. Yeah. These are the world's most densely populated cities, and by the way, these are the city centre authorities. Yeah. And the particular one I would quote you is an example which Ben's has already used, bless him, which has got a population density of 21,000, just over 21,000 persons per square kilometre. Yeah, this is the Ville de Paris for Paris. Yeah, not the Île-de-France, which has got a far bigger population. So this is the 2.265 million, as opposed to Île-de-France, which has got a population of 9.3 million. Next slide, please. And Ben's had a lovely slide which proved my point, also showing the Tour Montparnasse. The point is that this density, yeah, multiply it by the area of Greater London, you can get over 33 million people in Greater London. Don't touch the green belt at all. Yeah, and it would look like that. That is the Tour Montparnasse, and you know what that is. And it's a pretty reasonable place to live. Since the Tour Montparnasse went up in the 1960s, the maximum height for buildings in Paris has been 7 stories. Yeah, I agree with Ben's that we want small and dense cities, but I disagree with his diagnosis. Next slide, please.
I don't think I'm going to do the next slide.
Yeah. So this is just making the point about how small the Ville de Paris is compared with London. That's just central London in the background. Yeah.
So there's a restriction.
And that's 2.3 million people live there.
I probably should know this, but there's a restriction of no higher than 7 stories.
No higher than 7 stories.
From that one.
The Tour Montparnasse.
Which you can see in that photo before in the distance.
Yes, which was on the left. Yeah, and that.
No, if you go back, sorry, in the distance beyond the river.
That's not the top.
That's outside of. That's outside of Paris. It's not. It's not in the Ville de Paris. Yeah.
It would be really interesting if we could see a comparison between green areas in Paris centre and central London. That would be a nice comparison. When we talk about
you've got green areas in Paris here, yeah, and you can work out.
In the city itself, if we were to look at the level of green in central London to Paris, I was in Paris and I was really shocked at how awful it was. In the middle of the city, there's a big wide promenade, but right where people live, they're living in blocks of flats where we have gardens and all of this.
But Ben wants you to live in blocks of flats, except he wants them to be higher than 7 stories.
We're talking about density here, aren't we?
Yeah, I'm talking about densities, yeah, and I'm arguing.
High-rise are quite different things.
I'm not arguing for a Greater London Authority of 33 million population. Yeah? I'm just pointing out that if we had it as the same density as Paris, which I actually rather like and enjoy it and have lived in.
Green space if we had the same density.
I agree, you would have less green space, but you could have adequate green space.
Do you think we can lose green space in London? Do you think we can afford to lose green space?
We're a very low density city, London. Next slide, please.
Can I ask you something?
No, wait. Let him finish, because let him finish. Let him finish.
Well, no, I'm happy to handle.
Did they stop building high-rise in Paris?
When the Tour Montparnasse went up in the 1960s, about 64, 65.
I think I've had friends who live in really high stories in Paris, which are modern buildings.
It's really taking too long.
Clem, you have friends. Yeah? So these are the residents by ward per square kilometre in London. Remember that Ville de Paris is 21,000, and most of London is pretty low density. Yeah.
Robert, just a point. I've probably got a couple more minutes, and then we need to really.
Okay, on to the next. Next. If you follow Tom Chance's calculations and just try to, relative to transport, which is what this is about, and try to up the areas of low density to a medium level, you can get another 6.5 million homes. There's a lot of scope in London while keeping green space. Yeah? Next slide. Yeah. So the estimated population of London is 8.7 million, blah, blah, blah. Next slide. And we're aiming not for 14 million, which Ben's quoted, but for just under 11.5 million by 2050, according to the Greater London Authority.
I also got mine, but mine
next slide.
2019.
Ben's, I'm talking, not you. You've had your chat. So compare Istanbul, which went up from 1 million in 45 to 15 million. Nowadays, largely on the basis of Gecekondu, squatted housing, which looks like this. Next slide. And this. And this. And that's London's equivalent. And if Lewisham, next slide, which has got a population density of 8,600, this is in Lewisham, 8,600 per square kilometre was applied to the whole of Greater London, we could be 13 million. Next slide. Next slide, more or less. So climate change and energy. The last point, just sort of summarising, is we need resilience. Yeah? Next slide. So power cuts has been the history of, this is in August, California. I couldn't show Grendel Tower, it's too obscene to show, I suggest. So this is Lacanau Tower, which was in Southwark and was in 2009. And the issues of fires spreading from one flat to another flat have still not been addressed 10 years later. Not addressed in Bolton last week either. We don't have sufficient building regulations and control, nor the officers fighting, ensuring that building regulations are carried out. So that's why we wrap buildings in inflammable materials and fry people alive. Yeah? We don't have a society which can accept that sort of unresilient, large buildings. I could have shown you pictures of Dubai towers. Next slide. Yeah.
Two more minutes, Robert.
Next slide. We've got floods. That's it.
That's it. Thank you. Good.